Hello, and welcome to JJanaway 3D. I'm Jamie, and today we will be modelling a big old space rock, an asteroid even. I spent a bit of time working on this render, which I'm quite happy with. It's a fairly non-uniform shape, and there's lots of detail from the texture that's in there. There's a little bit of, it could be improved. There's some, if you look here and maybe here, there's a few little jaggy lines where just an increase in detail of the model would help to fix that. Otherwise, got a nice space background, and yeah, I wanted to show you how I worked on this and came up with a fairly simple technique on how to make it. So I'll switch over back to Blender, and starting in the default scene, we'll just grab the cube, and we'll do a very minor edit to it. So the cube is going to be the object that gets turned into the asteroid, and I just want to add in an extrusion along one side. It doesn't have to be a perfect amount or anything, and I'm going to probably scale up the middle and scale down the two sides. It can help to sort of make things a bit less uniform and just move things a little bit out of place, just to make it look a bit more interesting and a bit more natural looking. Something like that will be fine. So then we want to add in a subsurf modifier, or a subdivision surface, and we'll turn it up a couple of times. I think I went up to 4, so we'll turn that up on both viewport and render. We will quickly go back to object mode and go shade smooth, and then we'll add in a displace modifier under deform, and that has just made the whole thing get a bit bigger. So we want to add in a texture to first add in some bits and pieces, slight variation, but bigger variations over the whole shape. So we then come down here to the texture properties, make sure we're under that displace, and then the first texture, and we'll just select clouds. As you can see, we've got a fairly bumpy surface that's not obviously what we're looking for. So we just want to adjust the size a bit. We want to make it a bit bigger so that we can start to get this sort of lumpy rock shape. And we can adjust things like the depth to get a little bit more detail. I don't think Nabla ever actually made much of a difference when I was editing it. And then you can choose between soft and hard. Obviously makes quite a change. So sort of decision as to what's working for you. You might want something crazy and weird like that. You can sort of adjust the scales and things and work with that. I like soft, I think. I like about 0.9-ish. Yeah, that's looking fairly much like a rock that's in space. Quite happy with that. We'll go in here and we'll actually add a second displace modifier. We'll add another new texture and then come back down to the texture panel. And then under here we want to make sure we check that we're selecting the second displace, which is just displace.001 and texture.001. And here I would like to choose noise. And that's just going to add a little bit of stuff everywhere. So I just want to go back to the actual modifiers now and just work on the strength. So I want to bring this one way down, first of all. Probably even less than that. I just wanted a little bit of extra variation. And you can then sort of pick and choose how much you want the initial one to adjust the shape. So probably about that much. Looking pretty decent. So now we want to add in another subdivision modifier underneath that. So we can collapse these ones down now because we're no longer going to be editing those. And we want to use, not this, so we want to go to the render properties. We want to change to cycles. and we want to choose the feature set experimental. And I've got a pretty good GPU, so I'm going to select GPU compute. If you are using GPU compute, make sure you come into preferences. I think it's under, what's it under? System. And choose one of these options. I like CUDA, that seems to go pretty good for me, it goes nice and quick. So when I go to the rendered view, you can see it ticks up those samples really nice and quickly, and I can get a pretty good fast loading preview of what's happening in my scene. I don't need to go to rendered view yet. We might go to textured view there now. So we want to, let's go to the shading viewport here. And we want to add in some textures. I'll put a link in the description. There might be a link on the top right of the screen as well. And now we can chuck in those textures that we just downloaded. So I'll go Shift A, go Texture, and then Image Texture. And I want to go to, I believe this is the folder where I've extracted it to. There's only a couple of these ones that we actually need. So we want the base color, the height, and the roughness. So we'll add in base color first. And then I can Shift D to duplicate these two. And then choose the little folder icon. I'll choose height. And I'll choose roughness as well. So we don't want normal maps because we're working on a high poly model. And normal maps are more useful for lower poly models to show higher detail. That's not what we're really doing here. So we'll move the roughness here. We'll chuck that color, make this a bit bigger so we can actually see. Make the color from the roughness go to the color of the roughness here. And then the color here go into the base color there. And that's giving us a good indication as to what's actually happening now. And then we can set this color to affect displacement. It's not actually going to do anything yet. We actually need to go to the shader properties, go to the settings, and under here where we've got displacement, where it says bump only, and we want to go to displacement only, and then come back to this subdivision modifier and turn on adaptive subdivision, and that's going to now start affecting things in a way we like. We actually want to add in a vector displacement and chuck that in there, so we can actually control the displacement. So this is sort of like another displacement modifier, but it's doing it through a texture to control based on this adaptive subdivision. So you could do this through modifiers as well, but I like to do it through the shader. It sort of helps to separate what's the big details and what's the smaller details. Now in the nodes and the shaders, we want to set the actual mapping to the model correctly. So in order to do that, make sure you've got Node Wrangler enabled. That's just an add-on. You can enable it in preferences, go to add-ons, and just search for Node. Make sure you got that turned on. And there's just one hotkey that I really use from Node Wrangler, and I just hit Control T, and that has set the mapping over here. Now we're going to keep that on UV, and we'll change this vector, or move this, pipe this vector, I think is the word, into each of these different textures, and that will give us the same mapping for each of those textures. So then the colors of these rocks will be matching where the displacements are. So if we actually go to rendered view now, we should be able to see some weird stuff happening based on that, which it is. And we will set the size of the scale, I believe. Oh, we want to be going not into the normal, of course. We want to go into the height, and then that will start making things look kind of crazy. In rendered view, it actually looks good because of the rendering, but we don't want obviously that to look quite so silly. Now I do move the mid-level down to 0, and that makes things a bit more bigger there. And then I like to bring down this value, and I think I've got it 0.03 on my initial one, so we'll do that. Now it doesn't show too much in the viewport, so what we can do is, first of all, we want to get this mapping done correctly. So we've got the texture showing on and all that sort of stuff, so let's get this mapping looking a bit better. So if we tab into edit mode, select everything, and I think I did. Did I do cube projection? Yeah, cube projection looks pretty good. You can see that there's not really any seams around the texture. If we go into textured view, we don't have to keep reloading every time we move. And we can see I can't see any particular seams. There is one that's quite actually glaring and goes right through here. Once you increase the detail of things, so for here, if I turn this up to 5 on the scale, so this is a tileable texture, and this will allow that to tile. The actual lines that were there just now have actually kind of disappeared because we've just got enough detail for it to sort of be hidden. And yeah, at that point it's looking quite good. So we come out of, come out of edit mode, and then the actual change in shape around the model hides those seams even better. So I'm quite happy with this sort of scale. Then we can sort of go to render view and start to see if that's working. So we can actually see, now that things are mapped correctly, we can actually see there is some extra detail coming out of these rocks. And it looks quite good. I'm not going to edit the model too much more than this. I do want to fix up the color. So I feel like this color doesn't really fit what I was thinking of using it for. So I want to fix up the color. And to do that, after the color, I've actually just gone and added in a color RGB curves. And I'll just click that on there, and that slots it right into that section there. Now, obviously, initially, it's not going to change anything. I found if you move this center point, so you can click and add a point, and then if we move that center point in one of 4 directions, you start to get interesting looking results. So if we bring it down, you actually get a pretty cool red rock with a dark bottom look. I think to the left, it was more of a pale, and this would be closer probably to nature, I think. Things are generally bleached by the sun, and I think the further you come here, the sort of paler it becomes. Now, I liked bringing it over here, so it makes things a bit darker, gives a bit more contrast, I found. And it's just sort of tweaking, finding what look is good for you. We can see what it's like when we move up here. This is a bit more color, but also pale. So that's kind of working for me. So then, if we've done this, then when I bring it back over here, obviously this is pretty much the default look of the texture, where the rocks are pale and the dirt is dark. So for my personal preference, something like this I think is looking all right. And then we can start playing with the lights a little bit as well. So we'll just go back to layout now, and we'll stick in the rendered view. And we'll position it roughly how it will look fairly good on the camera. Press Ctrl-Alt-0, and that will move the camera into position. So then we can start playing with the lights. Now I want a sun lamp, and we'll have that coming in from a direction that is off camera, just to make it look somewhat dramatic. And I'll have it more or less straight on, maybe angled a bit down. So depending on the shape of the asteroid, being just a sun lamp is really hitting that side, and none of this is getting hit. So I think I will rotate it a bit like that. And that gives us more of a straight on look. Now I know from experience, especially this back edge, it's going to be actually pretty much black in the final render. So to fix that, first of all, we don't want this much strength. So let's dial that back a bit and just sort of play with these numbers and see what's looking good to you. Somewhere probably about 15, I think. It's looking quite stark, but you can still see the details. And then I will add in another light, and I'll make an area light. Well, that has shown up just in the middle of the world. So we'll rotate that and just have it more as a fill light than anything. And as you move it in, maybe make the power a bit higher. There we go. So the area light, it really affects based on the distance, I find. So I find a good amount of light from a close range that is pretty much filling everything in. And then I'll find a range that gives me just a bit of fill light, not too much. I'm going to adjust the light colors as well. I'm going to make that a yellow, and I might make this maybe a blue or a green, or possibly even add more yellowy color as well. Just sort of thought a different color would give us a bit more of a contrast between the lights and the shadows. And that can be a stylistic choice of yours as well. We are quite zoomed down, aren't we? Let's zoom back in and get a better idea of what things are looking like. So the green I actually kind of like in this preview. We'll have a quick render and see if we're liking that. I will quickly, before we do that, I want to chuck on a starry background. So first of all, let's just do a quick render with a black background, because that's space, space is dark. So let's make sure we save as well, actually. I haven't done this tutorial. Asteroid. Wonderful. Okay, so that is now saved. And we can go to a couple of settings that we might want to play with anyway. So dicing scale will give us more detail in the rock. It gives us more geometry for the displacement to work on. And then in the render settings, the render sampling, we'll turn it up to 256 for now. That seems to be enough to get a decent amount of detail. And I might turn this to 0.8 for now. Final render, you want to make these settings as high as you can. With the dicing scale, you want it to make it as small as you can to get the most detail. Obviously, you want to balance detail versus time versus quality. Those are all decisions you sort of have to make yourself based on the competency of your hardware. If you don't have very good hardware, then you can send it off to a render farm. And then I can just render an image. Or hit F12. And then we can start to see coming into existence as a fairly realistic looking asteroid. Which is very nice. Yeah, I do quite like the differently coloured shadows back here as well. It adds a bit more interest to the image. If I was to spend a bit more time trying to, compose the perfect image, I might put a little lamp in these areas if I'm trying to make a still image that looks really good with a similar color, and just to add a little bit of extra light in there that matches this. But otherwise, that's a pretty good looking asteroid. Let's set up the night sky, or the stars. To do that, we will go back to the shading viewport, and over here, instead of object, we're going to select world. And there's just a couple of nodes to add in here. And we want to add a noise texture. So this is a technique I picked off YouTube. I can't remember the name of the guy off the top of my head. I will add a link to his tutorial in the description. And we can just use the technique to really get some stars in the night sky. It's quite easy. And we add color to color. That should add a noise. And then the main settings you want to set in the noise is something really high. These are the settings I have just from my previous testing. And then we should be able to adjust these sliders. And you start to see the background up here that we're getting lots of stars. So let's bring this white a bit closer. That makes things a bit whiter. Now I believe we do need to add in this from object to vector. Yeah, that's the settings that we've got over there. Not too sure if that's making much of a difference. And then the actual location of the black slider is going to, as you bring it more and more to the right, it will be more and more black will be in the sky basically. And so you can start to see we've got lots of white and a little bit of, there we go. That's about the correct sort of look. You can keep going and get less stars, obviously, but I like to have a little bit more, I think. And you can also, which I like to do, add in some extra points on this color ramp, and I'll leave it a fairly dull color rather than a bright color, and I'll add in some red, and then we can also add in some yellow, sort of an off yellow, and then we'll add another one, and we'll make that blue. And so if you think of stars that you've seen in sort of a scientific sort of fashion, there's your yellow stars, your red giants, your blue giants, so that's why we've got those. There are obviously other variations on all those sort of colours, but I find just adding that little bit of extra colour into the night sky here. We've still got, so most of this is white. We could possibly add in another point after this last one and make that another white one, and that has, it gets very difficult to control exactly where they are, so we can make it longer and then just zoom in and see. So I wanted this, not this one, this one to move out here. There we go. So we got some very concentrated spots where we got different colors, and then we want to just get this to here all the way up, saturation all the way down. So then we got white, and we can sort of move this to sort of get that more of an off-white. If we want more off-white stars, or if we want less of those, that's sort of again a stylistic choice. I'll have sort of a medium amount, that should be fine. And then for my final render, I will probably, I'll hit save first before I change the settings. I'm going to go 0.5 on the dicing scale and turn my render sampling up to 512, just for this, the purposes of this tutorial. We can go even higher and do even more and all that sort of stuff. So we'll go, once again, we'll go save, then we'll go render image. This will probably take a little while, so I'll cut out the rendering. Okay, that's done now. So that one took 1:20. The last one took 30 seconds, so just bumping up the detail and the resolution and everything gives us more capability to have nice, beautiful pictures. We've got the nice starry background, and we can see we've got some bigger stars, smaller stars, different colours. Just sort of adds to the idea that we're in space. We could do some compositing. I'm not going to, because I don't feel like that's part of the scope of this tutorial. I'm quite happy with this result. If you want to change the sort of size of the stones and things based on a texture that you've picked or anything like that, if you're using the exact same textures, then we can go into, let's make this a regular size again so it looks nice. If we go into the object, make sure we've got this object selected. So we just go into the mapping, and you can adjust the size of the rocks by increasing the scale here, which will increase the tiling of the texture. You could obviously change it in a non-linear fashion, but that would not result in very good results. You get these are now very stretched in one direction, or squashed in one direction, I guess, by adding more. So by going up to 10, you get a much more rockier, they're more rocks, but they're smaller rocks now. And at this point, you also want to adjust your settings on the displacement. So right now, those little rocks are still pushing out as much as the big rocks were. So it might be worth bringing this down to, say, 0.01. Maybe a bit higher than that, because that's looking quite flat. And maybe 0.02. So then we've got that little bit of extra detail in from the rocks that are there. I won't go and do a full render of this, but that's just an option to sort of increase what you're doing. You can go even further and increase these values even more. It all depends on what textures you're using, the shape of your asteroid, the stylistic choices you're trying to make, really. So hopefully you have learned a thing or two from this old tutorial. So I'll just set those back to how I liked it. And the scale here to 0.03. There we go. So if you have learned something from this tutorial, if you've got a nice render you'd like to show, I'd love to see. Let me know how you're going in the comments. There'll be a link to my Discord in the description, as well as Patreon. So if you want to download this project file, all files from any videos I've been doing from 2021 onwards will be on Patreon. Any of the tiers all get the same rewards. I can include the texture files from this because of the licensing allows that. Obviously, check any website where you're getting textures from. If you like the video, hit like, subscribe to the channel for more of this kind of content. Otherwise, I hope you've had a good day. Stay safe out there, and I will see you next time. Bye!